get very upset. Meant I was calling her a goat or something. Oh God, she thought it was terrible. Very first my mother was she.
See, I would I would have gotten into all that kind of stuff about your parents. I would have gotten much more. I would have done this differently. But I think what Johnny's doing is better.
Okay, what are we up to? What should I be doing?
So after you went to college, what kinds of things did you look at doing afterwards, and what did you wind up doing?
Well, I went to college, and I met my husband the first day of registration there, and I decided this was the guy I wanted. I tried to go out with other fellas in between because I didn't want to be left high and dry if he wasn't following me. But it worked out well, and the last year of college he went into the Air Force Reserve. They were offering the fellas the chance to go into the Air Force and not be drafted, but to go into the Air Force as a second lieutenant. So he took that possibility, and he did that. So he was in the Air Force when we graduated, and he was stationed at Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn, which was not far from where I was living in Queens. And we got married, and we got an apartment in Queens on Van Wyck Expressway. And then he drove to Floyd Bennett Field every day, and I took subway into Manhattan. I had a job at the New York Trust Company. It was a yucky job. I was only the second Jew in the whole place. And they hired a bunch of women who were graduating from college. But they put most of them in the investment department, but I was put in the accounting department, and I hated my job. But I stuck it out for a year or so. Then I quit, and I went to Columbia Graduate School in economics for a year while we were still in New York, in Brooklyn. And then when my husband got out of the Air Force, he went to Princeton. He had a fellowship at Princeton, which he had gotten through Cornell. Someone who had gone to Cornell had gone to Princeton, and he left a fellowship. And the faculty at Cornell picked one person a year. And my husband got that appointment as a fellowship at Princeton. So we went to live in Princeton. And I got a job at Benson & Benson, which was a market research company. And I did questionnaires. And at first I didn't go around to people's houses, I just did it in the office. And then I did some of that, going to people's houses with questionnaires. Now they call on the phone, mostly. And I liked that, that was sort of fun. So we were there for 2 years in Princeton. And then my husband was very disappointed when he went looking for a job in academic things. And he went to Williams, and nobody showed up for the tea that they gave for him. So he was heartbroken. And then he decided to give that up. So he never went for his PhD. He just got his master's at Princeton. And he went to work for my family's business. First he was working in the lumberyard, then he was working in the tank company. And we moved to Queens, and then I had a baby, Jonathan, and we were living in Queens in an apartment for quite a while. And then I had another baby, daughter, Evelyn, and we moved to Great Neck. We bought a house in Great Neck. And we lived there oh, I don't know, for a good many years, till Jonathan was entering college, so he must have been 18 years, 17 years, something like that. I don't know exactly. And my husband thought that Santa Cruz would be the good place for Jonathan to go. So he found made inquiries in California, and then he found a job in Sonoma State, and we moved out here. Then it turned out Jonathan didn't like Santa Cruz at all. He went to visit there, and he decided he wouldn't do any work if he went there. So he didn't go there. He went to Grinnell instead. And Evelyn went to junior high in Santa Rosa. And then high school at Santa Rosa. And what else? Then, what else? Is there anything you want to know about Santa Rosa?
Well, let's go back to the neighborhoods in Queens. What neighborhoods did you live in when you first moved to Queens and you were working at U.S. Trust? What neighborhood in Queens did you live in?
Not Forest Hills. I think it was Kew Gardens.
Well, Kew Gardens was later after I was born. After Jonathan was born.
But that's where I was in Queens.
Oh, so it was in Kew Gardens the entire time.
It wasn't very long. It wasn't very long. Lived in Kew Gardens.
While your husband was in the service, you were in Kew Gardens.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So his time in the service was mostly like a regular job. He would just stay at home and then drive off every morning to work.
Drive down to Floyd Bennett Field in Brooklyn. He was sort of doing some teaching a little bit down there. Of course, I guess they asked you what you want to be, and he put down he wanted to be a teacher. So he liked that. It was a regular job. He was teaching the reservists who would come, but he had to work on Saturday and Sunday. And of course, I was off on Saturday and Sunday. Then he worked, and I worked. I was off on Monday and Tuesday. Then he worked. That was what was the worst part of it. That was all that was bad about it. Otherwise, it was like he was going to a regular job, and we thought we had tons of money because he was getting a second lieutenant salary. So that was pretty good for us, just out of college. And I think the rent was something like $90 a month. But that was a whole different time. So then we
Did you like living in Kew Gardens?
I wasn't very involved with. It was okay. It was an nice apartment, and I wasn't involved with the community or anything there because I didn't have any kids in school there.
Now you said you were only one of two Jews working at U.S. Trust.
Actually, when I got there, that's a fact. There was a man who'd been there for many, many years, sort of a file clerk. And then they hired me because I guess the Fair Employment Practices Act, they had to show if they were hiring some Jews or something. But they didn't put me in a great department. But anyway, there I was. I was not in the investment department, which is where I would have liked to have been.
Were you doing things that required your education?
No, not at all. Not at all. Actually, it's a funny thing. That's the first place I ever heard of Grinnell. Because one of the women they hired a bunch of women at the time, and one of the women was from Grinnell. And that's how I knew about Grinnell when it was time for Jonathan to go to college. Because they hired women for the Seven Sisters and Grinnell, so I thought that was pretty good for Grinnell. And what else?
Was there a temple or a synagogue in Kew Gardens?
We didn't particularly go to that synagogue or anything. We went to, for holidays, we went to my mother-in-law's synagogue in, where did she live?
She was in Queens, too.
Somewhere else in Queens. I forget the name of the places. So we went there, I remember.
And that was Reform or conservative?
Conservative. And then once we didn't show up, the reason we didn't show up is we were off in the hospital and I was having a baby. So I had the baby in Kew Gardens. And then what? Then after a while we bought this house in Great Neck. We moved there and that was nice.
Did you have a hard time finding a house in Great Neck?
No, but I went around looking at everything. We used to call my brother to come look at the house all the time, the houses, because for a short time he was doing house inspections for people, like because he's a civil engineer, and so he was doing that. So we used to bother him a lot to come look at houses and tell us if it was good or not, and that got his approval. So we bought that house, and we lived there, as I say, until we moved to California.
Did you like living in Great Neck?
Yes, that was good.
What did you like about it? Because there's a big change from Kew Gardens. And you had always lived in the city, and all of a sudden you were living in the suburbs.
Well, but it's pretty much the city. It's not country. But I had neighbors and stuff, and met people, and went to the temple there. And we knew people.
How did you decide what temple or synagogue to go to in Great Neck?
Well, I wanted to go to a Reform temple, and there were two. So I went to one of them. The reason I wanted Reform is because I didn't keep kosher, and I didn't want people telling my kids that they should keep kosher when I didn't. So that's why we went to Reform. And
how did you pick Great Neck of all the different suburbs? You could have lived in Manhasset or Port Washington or Roslyn or...
Well, that was right over the border from New York City. And my sister told me I should get over the border and get into the Great Neck schools. Because she lived in Little Neck, which was in New York City. And she was very annoyed with the New York City schools because they didn't take into account that her son was very bright. And he was bored with what was going on in the classroom, so he used to sit with a book on his lap reading a book. And the teacher got very upset about that. So she felt that, and her friend lived in Great Neck, and they were very happy with the schools. So she said, get into the Great Neck schools. That's what you have to do. So I did.
Now, your parents were, during the 50s, still living in the same place that you had grown up?
No, my parents have grown up in... I'd grown up in an apartment house in Brooklyn, and they moved out to a house in Little Neck. They moved to two houses. One, my mother always wanted a porch to sit on, because in Brooklyn she'd take a chair downstairs and sit in front of the house, because it was important to get fresh air, she felt. So, but she hated it because she didn't like the people she didn't want to talk to anybody. She didn't like talking to these people. But then they bought a house and she had a front porch. And she was very happy with the porch. So that was good. She lived on Thornhill Avenue, something like that, in Little Neck.
And your sister lived in Little Neck?
My sister lived in Little Neck, and I was in Great Neck, just a little bit away. So that was nice.
And your brother lived in Great Neck also?
Yes, he did. Out near the Merchant Marine Academy, Kings Point Park, near Kings Point Park. That's where he lived. He had a big house, we thought. It was the biggest house we'd ever seen. And a big yard.
Your other brother stayed in Michigan.
He was in Detroit, yes.
He had gone to medical school in Michigan and stayed there.
Yes, that's where he was.
How often did he come back to New York?
Well, before he was married, he'd come back every vacation, but then he got married to a Detroit woman, and he just stayed in Detroit. My parents and I went on a visit there once. I think they went more than I did. I just went once to Detroit.
Did you ever run into any relatives who were related to the Pickles? The Golden Pickles?
Well, my Uncle Bob lived in Bay City.
Yes.
And that's how Felix went to medical school in Detroit. I think he gave Bob's address as a resident of Michigan, because I don't think you had to pay for medical school in Detroit if you were a resident. I sort of remember that, but I was a young kid, so I didn't remember everything. I wasn't privy to everything. It's just things I sort of picked up and heard.
But as far as you know, the pickle business is long gone.
Yeah, as far as I know. Yeah, oh, sure.
Because there were a whole bunch of pickle companies in Bay City. It was a sort of, when there was a blight in in Long Island.
Ah,
A
so
whole
that's
bunch
why.
of cucumber producers moved to Bay City, Michigan.
Ah, so my
to-
Uncle Bob was in charge of that. He was the youngest one of the 11 kids that my grandmother had. He was the youngest, and he went out. He lived in Michigan. That's a fact. And what else do you want to know about that time in Great Neck?
Well, in Great Neck, obviously both your kids went to public schools.
Right.
Were you pretty happy with the schools there?
Oh, yes. Yes, I thought that was fine.
And you liked living in Great Neck? And
Yes, that was-
You stayed in the same place for a number of years.
Yes, we just had that house. We didn't move.
Until mid-70s when you moved out to California.
I sold the house.
Where did you live in California? Santa Rosa.
Yes.
How did you decide upon living in Santa Rosa?
Well, it wasn't because your father had this job at Sonoma State.
But there are lots of places around Sonoma State.
I don't know why he decided on Santa Rosa. When I got there, we rented for a while in Santa Rosa. We decided it was a good place to be.
You like living there?
Yes, I did. I liked our house. I thought the house was beautiful. Very nice house.
And the schools were good, or?
Yes, I was quite satisfied with the schools. I thought, as far as I knew, it was good.
And then eventually you wound up moving down to the Bay Area more closely. Down to, where did you line up first? In Berkeley?
From Santa Rosa, we moved to Kensington. We had sort of an upside-down house. The bedrooms were on the first floor, and the living room and kitchen were on the top floor. We were renting there. We had a great view, etc. But then we decided to buy a house, and we looked around, and there was new development out in El Sobrante. We looked there, and we liked the house because it had, well, there was a great view out the back. There weren't any houses near us on the street, but out the back it was all like a canyon.
Now, after you worked at Benson & Benson, you took time off.
No, wait a minute, there was a house. It's all right. Anyway, it was nice.
After you worked at Benson & Benson many years ago, you took time off for 2 kids. And then you went back to work where?